people start to trickle in. Oh, thank you, Abby. All right, I'm gonna get the agenda for everyone and then we will get to it. Oops, that's not it. That's the meeting code. Okay, there we go. The agenda is now in the chat. Hello, everyone. My name is Mandy Yates. Welcome to our, what is this, our July monthly meeting. I had to think about that for a second. I just have a few things to go over that we've been working on with our board. Sounds like someone's trying to come into my office. Oh, it's Abby. Abby's at my house, everyone.
I wanted to run up here and say hi.
I love it.
I'm gonna go back down.
All right. We're having fun with this. All right, so we just had our board meeting on Tuesday, and we have some exciting things coming up that I'm really happy to share with everyone. Things are starting to happen with in-person events. So we are already registered to table at Bloomington Pride Fest, which is on August 28th. We will be sending out information about tabling at this event, so please look out for that. I'm going to create a sign up genius so that we can do shifts at the table. And then also we have registered to table at Spencer Pride, which is on October 16th. So stay tuned for more details on that as well. Right now, the national organization is having their annual conference, and it is an election year, voting for the new president and vice president. So on the agenda, there's actually a registration link. It started yesterday, and it's actually going on right now. So register for that if you would like to attend. And then just a few more things. We are going to be getting some new Monroe County Now swag, so I'm really excited about that. We'll be getting some buttons from Bad Knees Tees, and we are going to be getting some stickers. So at these events that we're tabling at, we are going to have some of our new swag, so look out for that. And then what else? Women's Equality Day is coming up next month on August 26th. I know that Indiana Now is working on a campaign for that day. And actually, when I hand it over to Julie, she can tell us what all is going on with that. And we'll also find out some more information later this afternoon when Indiana Now has a board meeting. Let's see what else. We are not having any meetings next month. We're taking the month of August off. So our next chapter meeting will be September 19th. Originally, we had scheduled a meeting, I should say, and then this El Mercado event came up. We are actually going to use our chapter meeting time and day a day of service with El Mercado and helping out the NAACP locally. So I am pretty sure we'll be doing things like voter registration. So that'll be fun. I think the time is 1 to 5, but I'm not positive on that. But it's September 19th. And then the last thing I wanted to mention is locally, I've been working with a group. It's League of Women Voters, Reverse Citizens United, ICPE just joined the group, and NAACP. There's also a Delta Sigma Theta alumni chapter in town. We are going to be doing pop-up events on National Voter Registration Day, which is September 28th. We will be registering people to vote for the upcoming elections for 2022. So anyway, I'm really excited to be back in person for some things, especially events, because that is where I shine. Zoom is not my thing, but I do it. So anyway, I'm going to hand it over to Abby so she can let us know what she has going on. And yeah, all right, go ahead.
So in terms of general updates, I don't have a general vice president update, but I think that many of you know that I am leaving Bloomington in like a week and a half permanently for a new job that I'm taking in um, with the Center for Popular Democracy, and it's a one-year position, and I'm going to be researching climate change policy and working with organizers and how to advance climate change legislation. But yeah, that means that I'll be finishing my term as vice president here in whenever that term ends, I think end of this year. And I will miss you all very much. And I've really enjoyed putting together panels and topics like these and helping to recruit um, diverse like panelists to um, and and working with Natalia and Shruti and others to come up with the questions for, so yeah, I will miss I feel a little bit emotional now, but I will definitely like all my as my time to Bloomington is kind of coming to an end. I'm just realizing how much this place helped like well, Monroe County now and other places like that help like kind of develop me as an activist and an organizer, and I wouldn't have been able to do that without all of you. So thank you.
Thank you, Abby. All right, Natalia, you're up next. Okay. Natalia doesn't have anything for us. Okay, Julie, let us know what you have going on. Julie's our membership director.
Hi, I'm Julie Hardesty. I'm the membership director. So if you're a current member, we're sending out reminders for membership renewal when your month is coming up for when to renew your membership. So watch for that via email. Membership is available on a sliding scale from $10 to $40 per year, whatever works for you, no questions asked. So if you want to sign up for a new membership, we have a membership sign up form that you can use, and I'm going to put that in the chat. Oops, if I don't turn it off. There we go. And we're also currently in our Join in July push for member sign up and renewal before the Monroe County Now elections this fall for our officers locally. So anyone who is a member can vote, but you have to be a paid member for 90 days before the election, according to our bylaws. So we're encouraging folks to renew or join by August 15th to ensure you can vote for next year's Monroe County Now board. So consider joining or renewing today. And you can always email me if you have any questions, and I'll put my email in the chat. And I do want to say just a little bit about Women's Equality Day. So Women's Equality Day is on Thursday, August 26th. And there will be social media posts from Indiana now, from the state chapter, calling for redistricting reform to support women's equal right to vote and to aim to prevent voter suppression. So everyone's vote counts and should be counted equally in the state of Indiana. The social media posts are going to have instructions on contacting your legislators regarding upcoming redistricting in Indiana. So watch for that messaging, and please make sure your voice is heard on this matter. So you can look for that. And that's what I have.
Awesome. Thank you, Julie. Actually, that reminds me, there is actually an event on Wednesday evening. We are partnering with Women for Change for this event, and it is about economic justice for women. So I'm going to find the information for that and put it in the chat. And now I'm going to hand it over to Shruti to talk about legislative action.
Okay, great. Thanks, Mandy. So just a couple of updates. So as you know, the Indiana legislature is not in session. We'll be start to gear up for their next session soon, sometime in the fall. But in the meantime, as Julie mentioned, we've been doing Tuesday actions every Tuesday, asking you to call legislatures at the local, state, and national level and providing scripts. And we've also paired that with fundraising Fridays, where we try to support organizations related to the particular issues that we are asking you to take action on. So keep an eye out for those. And like Mandy said, I'd love for us to be back in person soon doing some of our postcard writing campaigns and letter writing campaigns that we did I think our last one was in 2019, but hopefully we'll be able to do that kind of stuff soon. And those are also really fun social events too, I think. So look for those. So those are the updates about the Legislative Action Committee. One of the things, Natalia asked me to give a short update on what was going on with the DACA decision that just came out on July 16th and the DACA litigation, because immigrant justice is one of NOW's core principles. And I usually give an update on some sort of legislation or other activity. So I thought what I would do is give you a little bit of an update on what's going on from the immigrant justice perspective, because I think that's largely missing from, in the news, you probably saw short descriptions of the case and what happened. And I think everyone can read those and read about the decision itself or read the decision. But I think the backdrop is actually of longer term and more importance for us. So my brief summary of that is, I think this decision on July 16th of this year, a federal judge in Texas in the Fifth Circuit held that DACA was unlawful because it violated the Administrative Procedure Act. As a short-term thing, the decision didn't do much of anything. It basically said, if you have DACA now, you can keep it. If you're renewing it, you can keep renewing it. If you've already gotten DACA, you're okay. If you haven't, if you're in that process where you just became age eligible to apply, you can send in your application, but it's going to be frozen and held in limbo. So the decision itself doesn't change that much, except for the new group of people who had just been granted relief when Biden came into office. But I think what the decision is a lot more significant for, and I'm sorry, there's a bunch of 3 kids under the age of 6 screaming in the background, is what it means in this sort of longer term battle over immigrants' rights in the United States. So, and there I think it's actually really important and has long-term implications. So basically, I just want to step back into, and this again, I don't usually see this in news reports about this case because immigration history is very complicated and most journalists just don't have that background. Although if you are looking for a journalist who does, I recommend Dara Lind at Box.com. She has a deep knowledge of immigration history and the dynamics of it. And I personally, in my day job, do a lot of immigration research and scholarship. So the important thing about DACA is the way it arose is that in the 80s and 90s, there were a lot of immigration restriction compromises in the US Congress. And basically what they did was, as a compromise, took away most paths to legalization for people who had come here either as undocumented or who had come here under various statuses and fallen out of status for various reasons, like they were no longer able to renew. But they still had paths to permanent residency and citizenship. So all of those paths were taken away in the 80s and 90s, or the majority of those paths. And the compromise was we had thousands of people in the United States who were going to lose all rights to, make their status permanent under these bills. And the compromise was, we'll just give those people amnesty right now, right? We'll say you got here under those rules. We can transfer your status right now. Everybody else, everybody from tomorrow onwards has no hope, basically. Because these compromises were based on work and what the type of work people were doing, children were left out. The other reason that children were left out was because these were messy compromises, and the idea was Americans are really sympathetic to children. The American public and the American Congress cares about children. We'll leave them out now, but in a couple of years, we'll get some legislation for these children. It'll be so easy because who's gonna, these heart-rending pictures of children, whatever, we'll all be fine. I'll be good, done. So of course that never happened. And these children started growing up, started passing the age of 18, stuck without the ability to legally do much of what any citizen or permanent resident of the United States enjoys. And flash forward to 2012, when lots of congressional compromises failed. Some of these children were not 18, they were like 27 at this point, living their lives in limbo. Obama enacted DACA, which really didn't give them much status. It just said, we're going to defer your prosecution. We're not going to deport you, and we'll give you some limited work, the ability to work legally in some limited circumstances, and that's it. And the idea was it would be a stepping stone to allow later legislation allowing people in that category to regularize their status. So of course that didn't happen. Flash forward to the Trump administration, where they tried to rescind the entire order, but they did a terrible job of it and violated the law in the way that they rescinded it, which is why it got to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court threw the case out. So I think it's important to understand what was happening. The original case that got to the Supreme Court, went to a judge like this one. The judge in this particular Fifth Circuit case that we are talking about today is widely known for his racist public statements and the sort of very negative and poor way that he treats people of color in his courtroom, as well as he's widely known for his sort of weak legal skills and sort of putting these decisions out there that are crazy. So he's the equivalent, if you want to go to a doctor and you're perfectly healthy and you want to wink and say, I need to get out of work, can you give me an excuse saying I'm too sick to go to work? That's your judge, right? He is that judge. So the first case that went to the Supreme Court, the Supreme Court said, basically, your doctor's note was so bad, we can't even, I as Judge Roberts can't accept it because you came here saying you can't work anymore because you can't walk, but you just walked up to me to hand me this note. This is sort of ridiculous. I'm going to send it back. So gets to this judge and he says, oops, my note didn't work. What should I do? I'm going to say the entire statute is invalid. There's no such thing as like that whole family leave thing where you have to get a doctor's note. I'm going to say the family leave thing is invalid and anyone who doesn't want to go to work doesn't have to. So what is going on is this is the first attempt to invalidate DACA failed. The second one is equally shoddy on the law, and it's the animus that led to the particular decision, and they're throwing down the gauntlet, right? Justice Roberts, when he led the Supreme Court, was too embarrassed to let really terrible judicial decision-making stand, right? He wouldn't have taken that doctor's note. It's throwing the gauntlet to this particular Supreme Court saying, we think you've changed. We think you're willing to accept whatever as long as the outcome is what you want. Here's another chance. Here's another doctor's note. Can you just kind of wink again and invalidate this? So that's the legal sort of situation. The larger situation is I think we're in a situation where we need to understand in the 80s and 90s when these legislations were coming up and there was this idea that we would support children, all would be well. That's a situation where you believe that the people on the other side are making good faith, legitimate arguments about immigration restriction and the effect on American jobs, et cetera. Those, people who are making those arguments don't target children, right? We're now, I think it's clear that after the family separation of the Trump administration, all the cruelty of it, that the proponents of things like this are not interested in good faith arguments. They're specifically targeting children and families. They're specifically targeting children and families because they have a different goal in mind. So from a larger perspective, these attempts to strip legal status from people and prevent people from enjoying the rights of citizenship or just the rights under the American Constitution. It's part of this larger push, right, which is extremely dangerous for a democracy, right? Any democracy that deliberately tries to create, through the operation of law, a group of people who don't have the same rights as everybody else is creating a really dangerous precedent and a really volatile mix. We've seen this in so many other countries before, and this is part of what is happening here. And so the ultimate the end point of this decision, I think, as I said, legally, it doesn't accomplish much. It's really built on, flimsy law or legal standards, but it casts a shadow over the lives of the people who are affected by this, right? It's meant to instill fear. It's meant to say, you don't belong here. You're not going to have a chance here. We're going to do whatever we can in our power to create this separate, it's a pathway towards a Jim Crow-like system, right? So, I thought it was helpful to kind of give a sense of what this decision meant in the larger picture. So hopefully that is it. I know that was very depressing. The only silver lining I can think of is that I do think there's been a little bit of a change in Congress where I think people are now understanding that some of these arguments were not good faith arguments, and that you can't rely on a future friendly Congress to protect children or anything like that, that you have to act and you have to act now. There's a slim chance chance with the 50-member Democratic majority in the Senate that we can enact something. But it's going to depend on people like us to push that forward and not let these things drop, and not let the fact that these are really complicated cases and statutes and things like that prevent these things from happening. So that's my silver lining. Hopefully it's a little bit encouraging. And that's the DACA update.
Thank you so much, Shruti. All right, so we are going to move on to the guest speakers. It's a group from the Housing Insecurity Working Group here in Monroe County, and Abby is going to be our moderator today. So I'm just going to hand it over to her. Welcome.
So thank you so much for joining us today. I was also one of the members of the Housing and Security Working Group that started under United Way's lead back in beginning of this year, so end of last year. Wow. So I'm going to start by introducing our speakers. And I'm going to copy and paste their bios into the chat so you can read all about their accomplishments as well. But we have Efrat Feferman from United Way of Monroe County. She's currently the executive director and has served in her current role since 2017. And the agency's main purpose is to mobilize people's power to care for others. And over 25 local agencies are supported with United Way funds, such as focusing on areas like food distribution, shelter and housing, early childhood education, and after-school tutoring. And I'm putting that here. And next, our second panelist is Isabel Piedmont-Smith, who represents District 5 on the Bloomington Common Council. And she's been involved in Bloomington city government since 2002 and has worked with other environmental activists on the Plan Commission to emphasize biking, walking, and public transit as transportation modes and to protect green space in the city. And elected again in 2015, she's excited to carry forward with her priorities of alleviating poverty, ensuring sustainability, and involving the community in local government. And I'm going to, can't copy and paste that. I'll figure that out in a bit. And Kate Wiltz, our third panelist, was elected to the Monroe County Council and represents District 2. And she also serves as the 2021 President Pro Tempore of the County Council. And District 2 encompasses much of Monroe County's southeast side, from Perry 7 to Perry 32. She's passionate about elevating voices of marginalized communities across all aspects of quality of life and place. And she believes that this is best done by meeting people where they are and providing them the support necessary to realize their vision for personal and community wellness. So join me in welcoming our panelists. So we have a series of questions that we prepared, and they're going to be aimed at particular panelists. So our question one is for Isabel and Kate. So let's kind of set the stage a bit before we begin. Can you explain a little about the upcoming budget cycle timeline? Explain a bit about what ARPA, ARPA funds are and what the process looks like, and how the city and county council will vote on ARPA expenditures.
Kate, you want to go or should I start?
Well, yes, I can go. The county and city are different on some of these things. So from the county perspective, in terms of the upcoming budget cycle, we typically start reviewing budgets that are submitted by our individual departments in August, and we have hearings scheduled for the evenings in the first couple weeks of September, and those are public hearings where people can, if they have a particular department that they're interested in, you can certainly tune in and hear what they're proposing for their budgets. And that annual cycle then finishes in October, where we then approve the entire budget. ARPA is the American Rescue Plan, signed by Biden, which is providing essentially a windfall to local governments, among other entities. And the county is receiving about $29 million. Our annual budget is $36-ish million. So this is gigantic for us. This is really, in my opinion, kind of a once in a lifetime opportunity. We are not going to be incorporating ARPA into that budget process I just described. We will be handling it as a completely separate fund and appropriating out of that fund for whatever projects are selected. That said, from the county perspective, the first thing that has to happen is a plan must be created, and it can be a very general, high-level plan for here's what our county wants to do with the ARPA funds. That plan is written by the Board of Commissioners, the 3-member board. That's the executive of the county. Once they've written the plan, then we can start talking about what those projects or programs might look like. And the county council has reached out to the commissioners and offered to hold joint meetings and be a part of that process to the extent that they are interested in having our input. County council is 7 members, and we will be voting to approve any money appropriated. So that's sort of our role, is maybe informal influence on the planning and selecting of where that money is going, and the formal approval of the funds to make it happen.
Yeah, so in the city, we also have to make a plan for the ARPA funds. And the city is due to receive 22.1 million. Our overall city budget is 95 million. So in proportion, it's less than what the county is getting. But it's a significant amount, and we're very pleased to get it. We have already been given the draft plan, or well, the plan that the mayor's administration has proposed for use of the funds. It is pretty broad. So we discussed it on this past Wednesday and adopted that plan. And we will be discussing this coming Wednesday evening, the first appropriation of funds. And just like the county council must appropriate funds, so the city council must appropriate funds that the city spends. The difference in the city government is that we are also the legislative branch, whereas in the county, it's the commissioners that do legislation. So we have a plan. I'm happy to talk about that more later, but the first set of appropriations is now, I need to check how much it is, $3.3 million. So we've actually already received about 11 million, about half of our ARPA allotment. But at this point, we're only being asked to appropriate 3.3 million. We have to spend all the money by the end of 2024, I think. No, it must be obligated by 2024 and ultimately spent by 2026. So that's why we don't have to hurry up and appropriate all this money now. We have time to think about the biggest bang for the buck and the best way to help our community with these funds. ARPA does have restrictions as to how the money can be spent. It is pretty broad, but the categories are, first of all, to address the negative economic impacts of the pandemic. So, help to our local businesses, our arts community, other entities that really suffered from the closures of the pandemic. To address the disproportionate COVID impacts on minority communities, to invest in infrastructure. And here, Specifically, it's only water, sewer, and broadband. So unfortunately, not streets and sidewalks. And then the fourth is revenue replacement. So we do expect, and we have already seen a decrease in funding available to local governments because, for example, less people were driving, and some of our revenue comes from the gasoline tax and a few other taxes that have seen a decrease, or we expect to see a decrease. So I hope that answers the question, Abby. Oh, the process. I'm sorry, your question talked about process from here on out?
Yes, what the process looks like for how the city and county council will vote on ARPA expenditures, I think. Yeah,
Okay, well, I guess I did cover that. So we,
yeah, yes.
the first appropriation of 3.3 million, we're going to vote on in about 10 days. And then we will see a significant appropriation from ARPA funds as part of our regular 2022 budget. I guess unlike the county, we are going to see it as part of our budget, although it'll be, labeled this far as ARPA. And we have budget hearings the week of August 23rd, and then budget vote in early October.
Great, thank you so much. Anything else? Does
Well,
Kaden, is it?
Yeah, I see Natalia's question in the chat about more of our timeline, and the commissioners have not committed to a specific date for releasing the plan, but they're looking at August and probably end of August. I think that we have to submit a report on the funds in September. So they want to have at least the plan in place by then. But yes, they're doing a little bit of outreach, I think, right now to see what the public might want in terms of that spending. So they're taking their time and thinking things over. We're hoping to have a joint meeting with them at our work session, the 4th, or it'll be the second Tuesday or the 4th Tuesday in August. It's when we have our work session.
Okay, thank you. That's really, really useful in terms of giving the picture of how this process will look like. And so my question 2 is for Efrat. And Efrat, in early 2021, you partnered with Tina Peterson to bring community members together to talk about what we could do about housing insecurity in Monroe County. And could you talk a bit about how that working group came together and your thoughts about the work that was done in the past couple of months?
Absolutely. And what a pleasure to be here today with all of you. And like you said, several of these folks were heavily involved in the work, and I actually think had the harder job. Tina and I really just kind of provided the framework for the work to happen, but folks like Kate and you and Natalia and Isabel put in the time amidst their busy schedules to do work on these committees, and I'll talk about that in just a minute. But I thought I'd give a little bit of context. United Way, before the pandemic, I'd say maybe half a year or so before, we had just gone through a strategic planning process, and we had engaged a lot of our stakeholders and supporters in surveys and focus groups, and we were trying to come up with our priorities for the next few years. We had been focused on education, earnings, and essential needs, and it seemed like you have to update that from time to time and see what the needs data says about the community, what people want to see happen, and where those two things sort of mesh. That tends to be our space, because United Way receives no tax dollars. We mostly rely on the support of donors, small and large, individuals and businesses. And then we may get some small grants every once in a while, like the one from the IRS to do our tax service. So from that whole process, we actually heard loud and clear that homelessness and housing insecurity was a top concern for our community and our stakeholders. with some associated or not intersecting, I should say, issues also up high there, like mental health and substance use disorder and food insecurity. And we have been looking into some, what some other communities were doing, and really getting interested in this concept of a big housing first push. But then the pandemic came and we set all that aside and focused on the direct relief needs of the pandemic, and raised money for that, distributed it to nonprofit agencies, and spent a good year plus, and we're still doing that work. But in the community, with COVID, we sort of fell into being a convener around different areas of need, and the sheltering system in our community was a big focus. The work around putting up the isolation shelter, was a priority for United Way to Fund, and we were on the phone calls with folks from city, county, agency providers, others 3 times a week, just to talk about the immediate needs of people in crisis and during a pandemic. Had to do a lot of work to make sure that our shelters and those systems were safe and still, attended to people's needs. And then, as you'll recall, there was also some things came to a head with the tents in the park, and the legislative side of things, and a lot of discussion about that. And I'm trying to give this context to say all these things were kind of going on, and we were already a little in the middle of trying to coordinate some immediate needs. But then I think with all this going on, and with the issues that were more visible, like at Seminary Park, really bringing together a conversation in the community, it just seemed to get us all to realize that we had to do something different and something more comprehensive as a community, so that we're not back here again, every few years, wondering why this crisis point erupted, right? We know homelessness has been on the rise in the community. Depending on what year you take your data from, you could say like a 10% increase over the last 9 or 10 years, but we've had some spikes, so it kind of depends where you set that point to really use a stat like that. But it's been on the rise, and we've invested in our shelters, which are necessary, but we also realize that that's not enough, and shelters aren't going to be the solution to problems. They're kind of like the emergency room in the scheme of things, but you don't want people to stay in the emergency room forever. You need to send them on either to a rehabilitative facility, a transitional program, or in-home with care, in-home independently, I may do if I had to go to the ER and then come home. And I'm totally borrowing that whole metaphor from Emily Pike. I love that she uses that, and I'm crediting her with that metaphor for our shelters and other things needed in the system. So late in 2020, with all that going on in the background, we were talking to the Community Foundation. We were, of course, in close contact with city officials and county officials, and then stakeholders were reaching out to us and just saying, can we call some people together and try to figure something out? And Tina Peterson from the Community Foundation and I talked, and just thought, well, this may be an appropriate role for both of us. The city, clearly wants to work on this problem, but has boundaries, geographical boundaries. And the same with the county. We were hearing from county officials, but you have geographic boundaries too. And United Way's territory is a little bigger. We serve 3.5 counties. We also, have United Way partners in other counties nearby that we work with. And then the Community Foundation has that network too, and also has the Regional Opportunities Initiative territory, which is 11 counties. And we know homelessness is it's a regional issue, right? People don't look at the boundaries of Bloomington proper and think about, well, if I'm here or there, that's going to mean different things. And so we started with convening providers and funders primarily for some discussions, and also identified some other stakeholders who either approached us, or someone said, hey, you should get this person around the table, and started meeting. And I think it was December, so almost 8 months ago, and thought, well, okay, let's start by looking at what do we have in place for our community. Are there any plans? Are there, who's doing what's already in the works? And really the most comprehensive thing we could point to was the 2014 Heading Home Plan that many entities and people had worked on. And it was housed within the South Central Indiana Housing Network, which is a group of providers in the region that meets monthly to coordinate intake based on HUD's procedures of how you assess vulnerable individuals and then prioritize housing for them. Most of our providers in this community were part of that group and are, a couple are not, but I'll talk about that too, getting them to all sort of align on some things. But we started there and we pulled out this plan and we sort of did a self-assessment of ourselves. Like, how have we done in all these goals and objectives? It's a plan with 3 areas to make homelessness rare, brief, and non-repeating. And as we looked at the different things in there, it became clear that where an objective could be furthered by one agency, like say Beacon or New Hope for Families, where one agency could really advance an objective like of expanding rapid rehousing. We were doing all right, but where there were things that took broad coordination and collaboration and expanding beyond, a region of Bloomington or Monroe County, we just hadn't made some progress in. And as we looked at that and talked about why that might be, it was just very clear to everyone that no one person or entity was really given the resources and the capacity to execute this plan. The housing network's a great network, but it's all made of individuals who are like running agencies full time, not, dedicated to executing a broad regional plan. And no money was given towards, these strategies either, unless again, they were housed within an individual agency and happened to align with that agency's mission. So that kind of helped galvanize this notion that if we're going to do this, we all need to be committed to like really investing in implementing whatever we came up with. And I felt like that consensus was there around that table. And then it was time to sort of look at, well, how else do we update this plan? Because it's 7 years old, a lot has changed, a lot of things, a lot of communities have done some really innovative things that we can learn from. And that's where we came up with the concept for 3 subcommittees. The Data and Dashboard Committee, to look at what kind of data do we collect already as a community, as individual agencies, how can we aggregate that and share it out with the community so that we have some baseline measures for things associated with homelessness and housing insecurity that then allow us to track our progress down the road. The second committee we called Map and Gap. Let's map out all the resources in our community related to this area of need, and then identify the gaps from there and make recommendations, to the plan from that. And then the third one was Promising Practices, which looked at other communities and actually used the Built for Zero model, where communities who have eliminated at least one category of homelessness, so that could be veteran homelessness or family homelessness. Those are often the two easiest to tackle. It's a big job, like for any community, to think about eradicating homelessness, but if you can kind of break it down into some categories, then there tend to be there's funding streams and strategies associated with each one, right? And veterans homelessness is an easier one because there are a lot of resources from the federal level for that. And we actually do pretty well as a community on that one. So yeah, Map and Gap represent, yes. I'm just seeing the comments, Abby. That was the most fun one, I know, but they were all really important ones too. So yeah, look, the Promising Practices looked at other communities and then made recommendations based on what seemed to be the successful themes from other communities. And that's where there were, I think, a few key concepts. One was to house an entity dedicated to this work, to executing the plan and all of its components, somewhere like United Way, and now it is United Way, because I think that's, everyone agreed, the most logical place, and have that be sort of a self, like an incubated thing, where in a couple of years, we may want to see whether it's something that needs to be spun out into its own nonprofit, or whether it makes sense to just keep it there, but it'll be sort of separate from United Way's day-to-day work in terms of revenues and things like that, and just have two people dedicated to it. There was a recommendation to adopt the Housing First model, and that definitely, made sense to everyone. And I'm happy to pause if anyone's not really familiar with that concept, because I think that is like a key piece of everything. Is anyone need a brief explanation of Housing First? Raise your hand. Okay, this group's, yeah, probably pretty in the know about all these things, but if you need me to define anything, just let me know. And there was also, let's see, other key recommendations. Data and Dashboard made recommendations on proceeding with a data dashboard. Map and Gap, I think key from that was just the need for more case management, more coordinated case management, including training and aligning with Housing First, as well as just more housing options. There were recommendations for working with landlords in the region, and offering some tools and incentives to house people who they may not currently want to take on as clients due to a history or things like that. And other communities that we looked at were using things like creative incentives for landlords, as well as just outreach and education to landlords. And so that, that's going to be a big piece of things. So as the committees finalized all that work, we came back together, we updated the plan, and hopefully you saw that was just released last week, or over a week ago, I guess, by now. And so now, concurrent with that release, we have also been working on the budget for implementing this not only with the staffing, but some funds for consultants to do some of the pieces like the data dashboard, excuse me. And the piece about, landlord incentives like a risk mitigation pool or just financial incentives outright, training that has been identified, all of these things that take funds and take coordination. The mayor presented a request to the city council on Wednesday for funds to help launch this. We have talked to the county council and commissioner presidents, just, to suggest we're seeking support there too, as well as a couple of the townships who have been involved with the work. We've also identified a piece that we will raise from philanthropic channels. And then United Way and the Community Foundation are seeing what we can put in to support this as well, including the sustaining piece. And I think with that, we're talking about launching an endowment at the Community Foundation, where if we can build that up enough, it can sustain at least the salary part indefinitely. And then not have to worry about, the political processes and the different factors that affect, tax revenues and things like that. So that is where we are at the moment. We're also, I guess one thing, sorry, going back here, another key recommendation was to expand that the working group into a broader coalition. So as we get the funding and hire the staffing, building that coalition with more partners from different sectors will be key, and then being able to get moving on some of the other strategies. So that's where we are at the moment, and I'm happy to answer questions now or at the end, but yeah, thanks.
Yeah, thank you so much. It sounds a bit like you also kind of answered question 3, which was about the update to the heading home plan and some of the things that you want to see going forward, such as like a more of an emphasis on housing first. So I'm going to move on to question 4 for Isabel and Kate. So you both serve on the Housing Insecurity Working Group. And could you talk a little bit about what motivated you to join this working group and a little bit about what you did?
You can go first this time, Isabel.
Okay. Well, certainly the pandemic highlighted for everyone how precarious the financial situation of so many of our community members is. And then with the encampment at Seminary Square and the way it was kind of not handled in a great way by the mayor's office, and the concern of eliminating an encampment during a pandemic, it all just kind of brought this issue to the forefront of my mind as a public servant, and thinking about the humanity of these folks that are without a place to go during a pandemic in the middle of winter. And a lot of the people I talked to about, we shouldn't move the encampment, we should find out what's keeping people from going to shelters and try to find somewhere for them to go before we close any encampment. But the more I talked to people, the more they were like, well, we need a plan. We need a longer term plan. I mean, we can have a short term solution here, but it's just a Band-Aid. And thankfully Beacon provided that Band-Aid by creating that low barrier shelter in the warehouse space for several months, starting in late January. But I came to realize, we need a longer term plan. I dug up the heading home plan, as so many people did, and said, hey, well, this was a good start. What happened to this? And then I heard that Efrat and Tina were getting this group together. And so I was very eager to participate.
Actually, a lot of that is similar. I looked at this as a fantastic opportunity to learn as well as contribute, because housing supply, housing insecurity, homelessness are all part of a kind of a systemic problem that it's going to take more than just the city to address the fact that there are homeless encampments in town. It's going to take more than just the county to look at some of the mental health issues, for instance, that we can affect. So I think that for me, I joined the subcommittee for promising practices and was thrilled to do so, but I was just thrilled to be asked, frankly. And as far as the work that we did, I have to say that our subcommittee was the best one. It was fascinating, and the heads of our committee really took the time to educate us about the different types of homelessness and about how our community was performing in addressing these issues, and then gave us homework. Isabel and I actually partnered to do that homework. We worked in pairs throughout the group and looked at other communities who are having success through that Built for Zero program that Efrat mentioned. We contacted Montgomery County in Maryland. We also looked at an area in California as well. But the ideas that everyone brought back from that homework assignment were incredible. And that really formed a lot of the recommendations then that we brought back to the larger group. And there's a lot of innovative work going on. There are a lot of creative solutions. And I think what's really important to keep in mind as we move forward is that systemic nature and the fact that we need to be looking at this problem from a number of different viewpoints, and a number of different approaches are going to be necessary. So looking at preventing homelessness, so people who are just at risk or are cost burdened by their housing, and how can we support people there, people who are then in eviction court? What can we keep doing to help that negotiation process between landlords and renters? And then I too love the analogy of the emergency room, but the shelters, I think, are what so many people are most familiar with as sort of the face of addressing homelessness, but they are just the crisis intervention. And I say just simply because it is just a part, but it's a huge part. It's an important part. There's so much more, especially when you start applying the housing first model and start thinking about sheltering as perhaps it's a Band-Aid, but there are a lot of things to try to prevent people from getting into the shelter, as well as getting them out of the shelter as quickly as possible. And that really, the discussions that we had in that group really opened my mind to that process and how many resources there are out there for supporting making that homelessness, rare, brief, and non-repeating. I mean, that was sort of the mantra that we used. And I'll just stop. I mean, it was a really good process, and the document, if you haven't looked at the Heading Home document, is just chock full of some great recommendations. I'm excited that Efrat's looking at budgeting And I know that county council's interested in what you come up with there.
Yeah, if I could just add a shout out to Natalia Galvin, who was also part of the Promising Practices group. And Kate mentioned she and I partnered up and we looked at 2 different communities. Natalia looked at like 5 and she didn't even have a partner. And she brought extensive notes to the table. And so just thank you very much, Natalia. And also I want to give a shout out to Emily Pike, who is the co-chair of our Promising Practices Committee and director of New Hope for Families. She really educated us all, and she made us read this book, the book on ending homelessness by Ian DeJong, which was eye-opening. It's written by somebody who does consulting, who has been in the trenches as a case manager and has done a lot of consulting with communities on how to end homelessness, how to reduce homelessness and eventually end it. And so I recommend this book. I'll put it in the chat. I recommend this book to anyone just to better understand the issues and why housing first is so essential.
Yeah, I noticed that your group had like a reading club and all sorts of things, and I couldn't help but feel just a bit jealous looking at all of the great work that you were doing. So for Isabel and Kate, like, we know that it's very difficult as council members to put together a wish list since the executive body typically puts together the budget. But what would you like to see funded in the housing insecurity space from both the city, county, or through ARPA?
Well, I mean, I think the most immediate need is for staff to hire, I would say at least 2 staff members to follow through with for the budget requests, grant writing, coordination, et cetera, et cetera. And I wrote in the chat, so the appropriation ordinance we're going to be voting on in about 10 days that was initiated by the mayor's office does have $1.2 million for that purpose, to get to take the initial steps for implementing the new Heading Home plan. Aside from that, there's also money going to the Bloomington Housing Authority to look into possible land grant, and there's additional funding for a landlord risk mitigation fund, because as we know that many landlords just don't want to rent to people with a history of homelessness or people on the very low end of the income scale, even if they have vouchers, because there's this fear that there'll be a financial loss. And so, whether it's founded or unfounded. So that risk mitigation fund is also going to be very important. So some of the things I want to see are already in there. I'm very excited.
Yes, and I think that I'm advocating that we at a minimum match what the city's proposed. I think that we need to work on this together and be true partners, and that would be my first step in doing that, is to at least match what the city's already putting forward. But I also want to see the county government is responsible for the criminal justice system, and we're looking at ways in which we can really make some lasting change in that arena. And where I see some overlap is where I'm hoping that the county can really make a difference as well. So in some supported housing approaches to mental health, because we all know that addressing mental health issues is a basis for all of these, improving all of these outcomes, whether it's housing or incarceration. If we can put some real effort into reforming and putting in place supports there, I think that will be really successful. I like I want to support programs rather than individual individual, staffing, although you can't have a program without staffing. So I get that. So it's kind of a hard thing to balance. I like the idea that we could get started with staffing for this program that is outside of either city or county purview, and that then could become a self-sustaining program with other funding sources. So I'm really supportive of exactly the steps that are being taken. I'd also really like to see with our ARPA funding a childcare component. I feel like that sometimes is a big barrier, and it can be incorporated into ARPA pretty easily, because I feel like that's been a big impact in the pandemic, is kind of highlighting childcare needs that that have always been there, but have forced a lot of folks to quit their jobs over the past couple years. I can't believe it's been a couple of years, 18 months. It's crazy. So that's that's sort of where I am with a lot of the ideas that are being tossed around.
And a follow-up for Efrat, is there anything you would wish for during either the general or ARPA budget cycle? I think you already mentioned the staffing component, but if there's anything else.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think we've communicated that wish to both bodies, and would love to see that fully supported, of course. I mean, it'd be great if ARPA funds, like if they decided to allow them to be extended a year or two, because I think, is it the end of 2024 they have to be used by?
They must be appropriated by the end of 2024. I do think there's a little bit longer time.
End of 2026 is when they
Right.
have to be used.
Okay. So yeah, no, that's actually great. I think what this plan does not do, and what our staffing proposal will not do, is actually build housing options. And I would be fully supportive of funds from ARPA on either county or city or wherever being used for capital projects that align with the plan. We will certainly, play a role in identifying such opportunities and in trying to bring people around the table where we see some opportunities, but that's a whole different area, of legislation and specialty and all of that. So I think, but it's part of what's missing. We know it's a huge challenge for our community, just affordable housing in general, let alone at the very lowest income levels.
Yeah, I totally agree. And for any other sources of funding that we can look to combat housing insecurity, can community members help on this front? And I also just wanted to point to a really good question that Tammy Jo had in the chat, which is on any pressure that the city or county can place on lending institutions to help with mortgages. She has friends who is struggling with being told they can't afford it for $300 less than what they pay for their apartment, and that seems ridiculous. I think it's a really good question. I decided to just kind of slot it in here.
And Becky's chiming in. I know you probably have some expertise in that. There's also, Becky, like you said, I was about to say city programs, HAND has something, and the federal down payment programs. Discussion about reestablishing a housing trust fund locally. A little bit of discussion on that.
I think that the endowment that Efrat mentioned will be very important in this respect. That, local individuals and corporations could pay into.
Absolutely. So as we roll all this out, and there will be, I think, marketing efforts for any sort of endowment fundraising or just the immediate fundraising, so that individuals and others can support the work if they're interested. Also on the link that I shared, and I can share it again, there is an interest form if you're interested in getting involved in the coalition that's going to be built up, or possible committees that will come out of that. We're sort of at this point where, you know, we finished sort of one phase, I'm going to move into the next with implementation, and we feel like there will be committees needed beyond just, you know, coming to a coalition meeting every quarter to get an update. We're thinking like the regional piece is one that needs to be now scaled up. So what does that look like in terms of working groups or committees, as well as others that support the strategies and the plans? So if you're interested in getting more involved or hearing more, if you could fill out that interest form, I'll pop it back into the chat real quick.
Yeah, I also have spoken with folks. I'm not sure how far we've gotten on some of the capital project kind of discussions. I do see that as really important, and there's opportunity, I think, in the county in areas that could potentially be connected via public transportation, and have a little bit lower land cost to do some very low cost housing options. We've talked about that kind of thing. We've talked about the idea of supporting shelters more directly, so that we've got kind of that end of the spectrum covered as well. But like I said, I think that really what we need from the county is that support in the mental health support. Really, I think that's I guess it's not that that's the highest need. It seems to be the most popular way to go with my colleagues. So that's where I'm feeling the most potential.
So in terms of question 8, for all, we talked, Efrat mentioned a bit about like the lack of actual like housing development. And so are there any major plans in the works for any long-term or big investment solution to help people experiencing homelessness in the future? And some cities are purchasing hotel sites or creating tiny home communities. And do you see that, and for this question is for all of you, do you see that being a fit for Bloomington?
I do. I think there are a lot of difficulties in the kind of the details of that kind of thing, but I do think that there's a lot of redevelopment of areas that could be done to creatively house folks with varying levels of support. So absolutely, I think that would be possible.
Yeah, I think we need to distinguish between a tent village or tiny home village that is basically a shelter, and a tiny home village where people pay a little bit and have a lease and have a permanent home. I think the latter I would be more in favor of, because the former is just, I mean, sheltering, it's just not, the person doesn't gain agency from being in shelter. They don't gain any sense of self-worth or hope of being self-sufficient. And so those, we need to, kind of have options, have low income options for people to still take responsibility for their lodging, but at a very low income level. And I think that was, this Ian DeJong book really highlighted that and said, don't make a tent village real comfy, because this is not our ultimate goal. Our ultimate goal is to get these people into a long-term housing. So yeah, depending on the details, I think it would be a good idea. But again, it's the question of, who would run it, who has the administrative capacity to create such an entity. But there are, some examples in other cities. I haven't delved into them, so I don't know which ones are more along the lines of permanent housing rather than temporary. So I mean, I'm open to it.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, I think this is like a moment in time where we can be creative, and so much is shifting that as we look at things like the big box stores that are closing down, and hotels, it's hard to say, will tourism fully bounce back here, or are we going to see some shrinkage in that demand that leaves some hotels considering other solutions? Other cities are looking at things like that, of converting say a hotel to living spaces. I'm not aware of any immediate plans by anyone currently, but I am hopeful that as we build out the work, have staffing, have a coalition in place, that these can be topics we actively discuss and help, advocate for more fully in this community.
Deborah just put a really interesting idea into the chat. I just wanted to point that out. It's looking at mobile home communities, which I know we have several of, and giving, creating a system where we can give folks agency in settings that already exist. Like that, I think is definitely something we need to be considering strongly.
Yeah, there's just so many creative approaches out there. And I think back, because I actually, my folks, when we moved to this country, lived in like a co-op neighborhood in Mishawaka that was income-based, but also let them build equity. So when we couldn't afford a lot, we still had that. And then as they could afford more, they paid more in. And then when they had some equity built up from that, they were able to buy their own home 15 years later. But you don't see stuff like that around here, and I'm not quite sure why. And I don't know the landscape of real estate and development like other folks. Becky, you probably know it a whole lot better than I do. But we have to look at creative solutions like that, and where it's appropriate to deploy public dollars to support it. I think we have to really take a look at those things.
And speaking of housing, question 9 is, Kinsey Flats just opened. And Isabel, we've seen great work from you, Matt, Kate, and Steve on the land use committee, asking developers about being more thoughtful in their development. And so do you see more developments like Kinsey Flats in the future? What sources of long-term housing support do you see in the future for our area? I know it took like a really long time for the Kinsey Flats. The timeline kind of kept on changing, and it felt to me like people were getting increasingly frustrated. And then it opened, and I went there to visit the other day, and it seems great so far. But is there like opportunities for more stuff like that?
Well, Kinsey Flats and before that, Crawford 1 and Crawford 2 were heavily subsidized, and partially with grant funds and with low income housing credits. And there's just so much red tape to get those off the ground. So I'm not surprised that there were delays with Kinzer, although I've, talked to people who were on the list to move in there who were very frustrated, and yeah, it's difficult. So that's not something the city itself does. We do serve as a pass-through sometimes for low-income housing entities that use the city as their bonding entity, so that there's very low interest rates. But as far as the land use committee and the city planning tools to encourage low-income housing, we do have some tools, and the new UDO, the Unified Development Ordinance, has some strong incentives for affordable housing to be included in projects. And we have seen good results with that. The project approved recently on the west side of Switchyard Park in the McDowell Gardens neighborhood has a significant number of, has 15%, I think, affordable units in it, which allowed them to build an additional story. So those kind of trade-offs do help in some cases. A big disappointment recently was the Kmart East site, where they did not take advantage of any incentives. They just built what they could build without, without needing any exceptions, and therefore they didn't have to provide any affordable housing, which was very disappointing. So I think we still, can try to refine our tools, but ultimately it's often up to private developers and or low-income housing developers, and that is a field of expertise, to get all their ducks in a row to make it work financially.
I would add to that that our recent criminal justice study recommendations included supported housing being more dispersed throughout the community as opposed to concentrated in kind of project, one apartment building. And so I think that, and that's where I kind of see some of this overlap, I guess, is what I was referring to earlier. But I do think that we should be looking at incentives for the development of smaller and more dispersed supported housing units, either a group home kind of things, or I love the co-op idea, just depending, and there are probably a lot of different models that I haven't even thought of.
And so the final question before we turn to more audience questions is, how can we help, and how can we best advocate during the budget cycle for these initiatives? And Efrat, how can we help you year round? What can the average community member do?
Oh, thanks for asking. Yeah, I mean, certainly during these budget hearings, we appreciate anyone who could just share some reinforcement for the request and take time to come and, at the public comment portion, maybe give some remarks. That's always helpful, or contact your individual representatives on the councils and encourage your friends and family to do the same. Year round, we just really would appreciate your support for United Way year round. This initiative is very targeted, and as you can tell, like it's so different from what we do because we don't have to go out and fundraise, on the same level that we do to support everything else. But our annual fundraising drive in the fall supports so much else in the community that is working pretty well, and that's why maybe we don't hear about it all the time. But if we let that go, or if we don't keep that shored up, then we will have other pockets of crisis. So just appreciate your support for United Way year round, whether it's through the fundraising campaign in the fall or your volunteerism or advocacy. You can like our page on Facebook to kind of stay informed of different things we're up to and different ways to connect with us. And there's a e-newsletter you can sign up for on our website as well to do the same. So thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I would echo what Efrat said about attending the budget hearings for county and city, and any extra appropriation hearings like we're going to have on what is that going to be? August? No, not until August. Actually, I was mistaken before. We will have a discussion of the first appropriation of ARPA funds this coming Wednesday on July 28th, but then we will have a couple of weeks before the final vote. I believe is on August 18th, because we will have annexation hearings in between. So if you could come then and state your support. I really do think most city council members are supportive of funding the initiatives of the Heading Home plan. And then during the regular budget week, of course, the week of August 23rd, every night, 6:30 until God knows when, we have, or 6, usually we start at 6. And the specifics of that will be posted later on the city website. I just wanted to mention something else as we're talking about budget and we're in the National Organization for Women meeting. Just a little side note that one initiative that I'm pushing for and that I believe the mayor is going to put in the budget is paid family leave for city employees. So please keep an eye on that and hope to get your support on that as well.
That's fantastic. Yay. And I would also say that the county is slower on this path. I think it is important for the commissioners to hear from people about this issue, housing insecurity, so that it doesn't get lost in the shuffle a little bit with annexation that I know is weighing heavily on them right now. And the criminal justice study that we're looking at as well. I mean, we've got a lot of big things going on. So keeping this in front of them is important. And I would stress, if at all possible, emphasizing that the way to make this work is to keep building on that cooperative effort between city and county. That's crucial. Sometimes that's difficult, which is why I think the way this was set up was really successful, kind of pulling it away from the two entities. But to move forward, we have to have cooperation across city and county. There's just no question in my mind. And so the more people that can beat that drum, the better, I think.
Okay, so we have maybe like a couple of minutes for any final audience questions. And I do have one from Natalia for Isabel. Tonda Radawan spoke at Wednesday's meeting about the lack of rental assistance, and the city asked for ARPA, and the mayor seemed reluctant about it. Does this seem unlikely to be seen in either ARPA or the general city budget regarding rental assistance from the city?
That's hard to say. I did ask the mayor about that on Friday, and he said, we've done so much for rental. We want to focus a little bit on homeowners or homeowner assistance. And I think what he was referring to was not like, here's $500 to help you pay your rent, but all the subsidies and the incentives for actually building low-income housing is what he was referring to, I believe. So yeah, I think that his response last Wednesday was, hey, the county should do that. So because the county got ARPA funds well, not ARPA funds, CARES funds, to which they then gave to townships, which is a commonly known place to go if you're having trouble paying your rent. But I don't think the city should waive that responsibility. So I would like to talk to my county colleagues. Kate, let's chat about that. Because there is, especially in the immediate, July 31st, the eviction ban is being lifted. What are folks going to do? And I think we need to collaboratively talk about that and make sure there are options for keeping people in their homes so that they don't, fall into the homelessness cycle, which is so difficult to get out of.
Absolutely. And you're right. The county typically plays that role a little bit more, I guess, through their support of the townships. And that's one thing that we've ramped up during the pandemic is making sure that the township trustees were able to get access to CARES funds for anybody who needed it. And it's still out there. We've still got those lines open.
Okay, I don't see any other questions in the chat, and we're just about out of time here. So I just want to give one more thanks to all of our panelists for their insights and feedback on what we can do to help advocate for housing and security measures in the budget process. And so stay tuned for information about the day of service with El Mercado in August. And we're also going to upload this video to YouTube and post it so that people who've missed this meeting can watch it later. And thank you all once more. It's been such a pleasure serving on Monroe County now. And I am definitely going to be very sad to leave.
Well, I would love for you to come back in some venue and talk about the work that you do over the next year for climate change stuff.
Oh yeah,
Oh,
that
yeah.
will be interesting. That will be really interesting.
But thanks for having me. This has been a really good discussion, and I appreciate the
Yeah.
opportunity.
Same here. What a great group to chat with on a Sunday, and appreciate all that you do and all your advocacy and support. So thank you.
Yes.
Thank you for your interest.
Yeah, and Efrat, I'll see you in August for the Wake Up with United Way thing, I believe.
Yeah, looking forward to that. We'll have to advertise that too. Abby's
Awesome.
come back for just one more panel.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you all.
Thanks.
Have a good afternoon.